Well, good evening. Evening. Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Berg. I'm a professor of history at Shippensburg University, and tonight I am proud to be kicking off the third Empowering Communities to Preserve Historic Places in South Mountain Region workshop. So thank you for all of you for being here tonight. It is wonderful to see you. Some of you, this is your third workshop. This year, partnership of organizations have been working together to try to really help increase both our understanding and skills of people in our region to be able to do historic preservation work. I just wanted to quickly point to our partners here. We have Holly Smith, who's representing the Shippensburg University Center for Land Use, David Smith, and our friends at the Cumberland County Historical Society. And thank you so much to the Cumberland County Historical Society for hosting us tonight. Elizabeth Grant, in the back, from the Cumberland County Planning Department, Frank Grumbine from the State Historic Preservation Office, Brian Van Sweden, who I don't think is here tonight, who's retired from the State Historic Preservation Office, and Christine Musser. Christine, oh, in the back there as well, local preservation consultant. Tonight's workshop, this is my advertisement, so is made possible through the support of the South Mountain Partnership under the auspices of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. The funds were provided by the Community Partnership Programs Environmental Stewardship Fund under the administration of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Bureau of Recreation and Conservation. We're very grateful for them for making this possible. I also did want to take a moment to recognize the elected officials who are with us tonight. So if anyone's an elected official, if you can just stand up or say hello. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. So our first workshop that we held this spring focused on the why of historic preservation. What are the benefits for communities, for us as a region to be engaging in the work of historic preservation? Our second workshop then focused on the question of what to preserve. Frank Grumbine and Mindy Crawford of Preservation Pennsylvania talked about how we can determine what are the places that really matter to us that are worth making the effort to preserve for the future. Tonight, we are all rolling up our sleeves and getting into the work of how to preserve. And in particular, one of the things when we did a survey back in January, asking people what were they most interested in knowing about historic preservation, the overwhelming response was people wanted more information about how to research historic properties. So tonight we are very, very pleased to have put together not one, but two presenters who are going to talk on this topic. To lead us off tonight is Kara Curtis, who I want to both say is a friend, former student, but is also someone who's been doing amazing work here throughout the county on so many different projects. She is the Archives and Library Director and also the current interim director of the Cumberland County Historical Society. She's been with the Cumberland County Historical Society since 2008, has been doing research in so many different ways of her own, as well as helping so many researchers who have come. Oh, no problem. And so I'm very, very pleased to welcome Kara Curtis. So.
Thank you for having me as part of this series. I still remember my very first property I researched as part of Dr. Berg's class, and it was part of the Civil War walking tour, and it was Altek's drugstore. And I was clueless, and I've come so far, but I had no idea what I was doing. when I undertook that project it's not that long ago. It was, but it was not that long ago. It was yesterday when I first, my very first property. But a lot of people, they walk in the door expecting us, and like the concept that, we just have history on every property in the county, just waiting for them here. And I'm like, do you know how many properties there are in the county? We don't secretly have a folder on each of them. It doesn't exist. So, and the other kind of misconception, and then we'll get started, is that addresses are arbitrary. Addresses are very modern construct. So that's the thing that kind of blows people's mind. When I get started, I'm like, yeah, your address doesn't matter. That's a very modern thing. So I normally scoot people right back out the door and tell them they need to make friends at the Recorder of Deeds office. So we'll get into that. But first, I printed out my PowerPoint slides, so I will get those handed out. I had a battle with a copier because our copier decided to die today. So it was a fun day. Again. We have other fun things we can do later. Don't worry. There's other handouts for later. We get to look at documents later, but these are just the PowerPoint slides. Don't worry, we get to have some fun hands-on activities too. We won't be bored. So I liken researching a property as part treasure hunt and part jigsaw puzzle. Even when you've searched through everything, there might be some unanswered questions, but don't let that discourage you, because you're definitely going to learn. If I can turn my slides here, a lot along the way. I printed 50, so hopefully there's enough. Okay. Now we can tuck them there. Okay. So, and obviously, if you're researching a property that you own, you get to dig in ways differently than if you're researching a property that you're just interested in. One of the properties that's always up, like everyone, at least in the Carlisle region, is always interested in Thornwald. So that's always a hot topic. But if it's a property you own, you get to explore in the basement and the attics and then the closets, and you get to go in those nooks and crannies that you don't get to explore if it's not a property that you don't own. So you can explore in ways and maybe get those details that can help you uncover different truths about the property that you can't find unless you may be helping someone research their property. But you can still trace things even if you can't get into the nooks and crannies. And don't forget, if it is your property, you are part of the history of the property. People always sometimes forget that they are now part of the property history. So don't forget to include yourself in the history of the property. Okay. Recording information. Record all the source information. How many times have, as someone who has done this, I'm going to remember where I found this. I'm not going to remember where I found this. I can speak from experience. I'm going to remember what I did. I'm going to remember all of this. I'm not. You're not. So record everything. But this is also true because sometimes some people have bought a house and they've been handed a really nice packet of information from a previous homeowner. And that is amazing. But isn't it really nice when they tell you where they found things or what the thing is? So it's really nice if you leave a paper trail for somebody else. So take notes for other people. Even if you're going to remember, someone else may get your notes eventually. Try to find those primary resources. So the original or the recordings of the original deeds, the tax records, things like that. Try to find those primary resources. If it's something that you're not 100% sure if it's true or not, be clear in your notes that you're not 100% sure. Don't write down misleading information, and be open-minded. Because if you're not 100% sure, And maybe something, this sounds plausible, maybe keep that on the back burner because maybe it will show up that it ends up being true or something. And your friendly librarians at the Historical Society and other places are ready to help. And so are your county employees at the Recorder of Deeds offices and elsewhere. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be prepared to look at information in different ways. And that being said, the more you use these records, the more familiar you are with the quirks in the system. You're going to learn how they work. They still will throw you every now and then. Every now and then I'm like, I've never seen this before. And that's just the way they are. But the more you use them, the more familiar you will be with them, the more familiar with the handwriting you'll become. You'll just be more familiar with them. But at the same time, ask questions. That is what we're here for. That is what the Recorder of Deeds office is amazing. Their life is deeds. They know the deeds better than I will ever know the deeds because that is their life. That is their job, 100%. Okay. I love the next slide. Here's some information that applies across the board. Try every spelling possible. Don't assume a name was always spelled the same way. This is my paternal grandmother's maiden name. That's most of the spellings, maybe. So I once read if you gave a room of second and third graders a name, how would they spell it? And that might also be true for first names. Because even if they always spelled it the same way, they're not always the person writing it down. And I have a copy of a deed in my possession for my maiden name for Holtree. And on the deed, they spelled Holtree 2 different ways in the deed. So I don't know how they index that, but so even in the index, you might have to look a variety of different ways. So the Mac names are even worse. So have fun with those. Yes. So, and then when you're keeping track of things, keep track of which spellings you have tried, because that you'll go in circles really fast. So try every possible spelling. In deeds, in tax records. Obviously, tax records are a little easier because at least all the R's are together, but try every spelling. I can't emphasize that enough. Dates, use all 4 numbers in the year, especially, you know, when we write down dates now, you know, it's 24. But when we're doing historic things, which 24? So be consistent in how you're writing the date, because I don't know which 24 you're talking about. So use the 4-digit year. If you're not sure, use circa, use before. If you have a time period, especially with houses, it's very unlikely you're going to get an exact date for a house being built or a barn. You're probably going to get a general time period. It's not uncommon for a lot of buildings to be before 1798. There's a reason for that. We'll get to that. But before 1798. So don't be afraid to use those terms. Be as specific as you possibly can, but don't mislead. Pennsylvania is complicated. I like to say that someone could have lived in the same spot their entire life, but have lived in a different township in a different county without moving. So you have to be very aware of what is happening as far as the municipality and county splits. So there is a book called Mother Cumberland that is a little bit of a Bible to us in the library. So this is the page for Cumberland County that shows the townships splits and which township they're splitting from. And we would be lost without this. And they have the other counties as well that split from Cumberland, since Cumberland is the largest county that ever existed in the state of Pennsylvania. It's excessive because we don't get our final county boundaries until 1820 when Perry County splits. So, yes, so the land keeps splitting. So when you're looking at tax records, when you're looking at all of those things, you have to be aware. Is it 1859? Does Middlesex Township exist now? Do I have to look in a different township for the tax records than I did before because it didn't exist before? So you have to be aware of the township splitting. And this is true, not just in Cumberland County, but in Franklin County. Adams doesn't exist till 1800 because it's part of York. So, you know, all of these things exist across Pennsylvania. Just being very aware of land as populations grew, things are subdividing. So the main resources that I think of, deeds number one all the time. Because deeds are going to get us to the names. And when I first started, I talked about how addresses are arbitrary. The names are going to get us the information because the tax records are done by name. Everything is done by name. When you're going to look at the city directories and a lot of times things in the newspaper, you're going to be looking for names rather than an address. It's only into the late 20th century when you can really look by an address. So without those names, you're dead in the water, so to speak. So that deed trace is really the first step. There are exceptions to that. In particular, in the borough of Carlisle, you can get away with doing a certain amount of research, especially if you live in the original borough limits. There's a fair amount of research that's been done. Outside of that original borough limits, the harder it gets. If you live in the country, it's next to impossible. Yes, but in the original borough limits of Carlisle, there's been a fair amount of research done. Outside of that, yeah, that is the kind of exception. So there is a way. So if you own the house, that is easy. You know who owns the property. If you do not know who owns the property and you want to research a property, you can go to Property Mapper, which is a website. You can also find it on the county's webpage. This is a screenshot from Property Mapper for the Cumberland County Historical Society. And you can get some information, property boundaries, they're not perfect, things like that. Address, parcel number, all sorts of information. The last time the land was sold, things like that. And they also tend to provide a date. Property was built. Do not believe a thing you read. One of my favorite ones is next. I give this to you as a warning. I love this little house. This is one of the older houses in the borough. It's not the oldest house in the borough. Let me find this. Okay. So we know this house was probably built in the 1760s. According to Property Mapper, it was built in 1847. I don't know if they didn't look at the house, but according to Property Mapper, the brick house that is attached to it was built in 1840. The little house, is this on? This house that was built in 1760s, 1847. This house new, older. This house. No, this house was not built in 1847. I guarantee it. So don't trust the dates in property mapper. Some of them are not wrong, but some of them not right. So don't necessarily, some of them don't necessarily trust them anyway. And some of them are blank. So, yes. So, okay. So, yes, chain of title is one of the most important things. So obviously you need to know who the current owner is. And from that, if everything goes according to plan, you can go to the Recorder of Deeds office. And apparently they say they still like it if you make an appointment. It's on the first floor of the new courthouse, right when you go through security. It's right on your right after you go through security. But if everything goes according to plan, when you do a deed trace, it's also nice because in a deed, it tells you when the previous deed was recorded. Generally, there are several parts. They tell you who the buyer is, who the seller is, how much they're paying for it, how much land's being sold, the legal description, restrictions on the property. Some of those restrictions are not nice in the sense that they may say African Americans cannot live here, things like that. They exist in this county. Those restrictions do exist. Sometimes there's easements through properties for, say, the train, things like that. Sometimes there are parceling out of properties as the land is subdivided for children and things like that. Yes. So yes, the deeds are nice because typically you can just go, this deed will tell me to go back to this book. And then you go to this book and it tells you to go back to this book. And it's oh so nice. And then every now and then a wrench gets thrown in because there'll be a will or a sheriff's deed or something else that takes place. But lots of times it's oh so easy and smooth. So. Deeds. So. Whew. The deed that is being handed out, there's two deeds. And you'll notice when you look at them, there's something interesting. If you look at the dates, if you can find the dates for the two deeds, and you'll notice, hypothetically, they are recorded in the same book, back to back, but they are several years apart. And this happens sometimes. They just got filed together. The one is a delayed filing. So this happens sometimes. So for some reason, the one deed just didn't get filed. So it's for the same parcel of land, but the two deeds for the same house are filed at the same time because they are directly next to each other in the book B2, even though they're like 4 years apart. And that is what gets printed from Landex. So that is, if I went into the courthouse and printed it out, that's what gets printed. So that is what is recorded at the Recorder of Deeds office. That is not the real deed. This is the actual deed in comparison. Or the same deed that I, just one of the deeds, I have the other one. This is the actual deed. You don't, the recorder's office isn't the real deeds, the homeowner does. The recorder records the deed. So if you ever report for the recorder's office, and print out the copies. So we're going to just recording. This is the real deed. That's for that parcel on the south side of South Street. So this is just outside the original boundaries, because it was the south side of South Street. So I believe this one is the newer deed up here. So you will see. You look with good eyes. The thing, if you go to the courthouse, or you pull this up on your computer screen, you can blow it up a little bit, make it a little easier to read. Who's buying it, who's selling it, the neighbors of the property, all of that, information. And it does tell you even their occupation. Let me go back. I will also add, there is a grantor and a grantee index. So if you do get stuck, you shouldn't walk away from the camera too much. So the grantor is the seller and grantee is buyer. So the top of this page. So you can look up, and we have this on microfilm. You can also find it on Family Search, and there's other ways of finding the grantor and grantee index. And so normally it's the first part of the last name, the first 2 letters, sometimes the first 3 letters of the last name, and the first letter of the first name. And then not more alphabetically beyond that, and then kind of somewhat chronologically as it was filed. And then you can, so this is alphabetical by grantor, by that, and then you get so John Heap selling to John Davis Jr., and you get it on volume D, page 300, and it's in the borough of Carlisle. And it was entered in 1775. So you get that information in the index. So sometimes you can rule stuff out because it might not be the right municipality. Sometimes you get very large landowners like the Eggies or the Nobles. And it'd be really nice if they gave you more than just Carlisle, like a ward. They never really subdivide it more than Carlisle or Dickinson Township, but it'd be really nice if they gave you a little more information for those large landowners, but they don't. So looking at the index, you might be looking at a lot of deeds. If you're approaching some of those larger landowners through the index that way, because you could be running them down because they just owned a lot of property. So directories, I love directories. They're my favorite things. So directories become popular with the railroads. So I know there's some railroad people in here. And they're more for people coming in by train. So they become popular mid 1800s. And they don't have addresses attached, but you can get a sense of businesses and people living in an area. And so they tend to also have numerous places in one directory. I didn't grab the earliest ones, but this is the Boyd's, Chambersburg, Carlisle, Hagerstown directory. The way that the railroad works. So this is 1882 and 83. So obviously places people might see once you get here, but also what businesses might be in here. This does have some street numbers on there, but addresses also changed. Like, for example, Carlisle renumbered in 1894. There is also one in particular, Farmers Directory, that was, oh my goodness, 1914, 1915. the one series that I'm particularly fond of that we have a West Shore series that's not as complete, but we have a Carlisle series that starts in the early 20th century, is the Polk City Directory. And these are some of my favorite things because they have a reverse address lookup. And after I told you that addresses are arbitrary and they're silly, they're not when it comes to the Polk City Directory, because you don't have to have a name. So forget everything I just said for like the last half hour. With these, you can look it up by address. These are the one place where address is great. So I could look up, 110 Penn Street and see that Robert Jordan lived there. This is one of the only things that you can actually do that with. So the Polk City directories are fabulous for that reason. This doesn't really work with anything else. So the one place that addresses are fabulous is the Polk City directories. You can also do it the normal way and look it up by name. Polk, P-O-L-K. Sorry, I'll enunciate. But they start around like 1920-ish. And then we have them through about 1995. There's some holes. It's not perfect. We have Carlisle, there's some West Shore ones. But we don't have as complete of run for West Shore as we do for Carlisle. But these I love for that reason, that you can sit, especially with some of like the artifacts in the museum, we can go, when was that at that address? So it's helpful for that reason. We can look things up that way, kind of reverse pursuit directories. So, but they really don't come into play till the 1860s is like the earliest one, but 1880s or so is when they become more regular for the city directories. But once again, country, it's spotty. You get some of the little villages sometimes. The city, you get the telephone books too. Sometimes it'll be the Carlisle directory, but they do have some of it'll be the Carlisle directory, but it'll have Mechanicsburg and other places in it. So sometimes don't forget the regular telephone books. We do have a run of regular telephone books as well outside of the city directories. They don't have reverse lookup though. Newspapers. And newspapers have gotten a lot more searchable. You have to get a subscription to a database like newspapers.com, which you have to pay for. But the Sentinel is searchable. And just recently, within like the last few weeks, the Patriot News is now searchable too. Big news. It's amazing news. That is huge. We just found out that the Patriot is now searchable. It wasn't just the obituaries were before, but now the Patriot is. So that's big news. But earlier Newville newspapers, things like that, are there as well. So, yeah, so it is a paid subscription that you'd have to get, but newspapers.com has local newspapers on it. So once again, searching by names. Sometimes the township's playing around with different phrases, try different things, different spellings, all the things. Tighten up your search, loosen up your search. So try different things, because sometimes you get lucky, just messing around with your search. You can find all sorts of different things. So newspaper, you can find a lot with newspapers. Sale, not always bad things, not just fires, but sale for properties. And a lot of times it's the history of the home, but sometimes you want to know more about the people that lived in the home. So, who lived there, what about their lives? Maybe you're looking for the obituaries of the people that lived there, their businesses, maybe they operated a mill there, or maybe, the person was a World War II veteran, or a Civil War veteran, and you want to know more about maybe their story. So you start searching their names to learn more about their particular stories. This person made this house a home, so I want to know more about them as a human. So maybe you start searching for them. Once you have this is the home, this is the house. I want to know more about the people that inhabited the house. This is a way of doing that as well. I do want to say one more thing about deeds. I will add that the directories are also helpful because just because you own a property doesn't mean you live in the property. So property has always been an investment proper thing. So there's always been tenants. So sometimes directory is a good way of seeing who lived in your property if the person themselves were not living there. Yes, and the other thing is, as frustrating as it is, you don't always get a good description of the home or buildings in the deed. You don't actually buy your house. You buy your house, but you buy the land. So you get lucky sometimes, but you don't always get a really nice description of the buildings. You got like, the house and the outbuildings and a barn, and there's a barn there. If you get lucky, you get a really nice description of what's there. But you're really buying the land. We all know that we're buying a house, but that's not what the recorder of deeds really, they care that you're buying the land. So you don't typically get a really good description of all the buildings on the property. We know that we're buying a house and that we really like the house that we're buying, or that someone else is buying, but that's not what that's actually cared about in the deed process, it's the land. So some other fun things that are visual. So maps. So we've got all sorts of things. This is a road petition. These are housed at the county archives. Excuse me. Which is a separate facility that's out kind of off of Allen Road. This one's particular, they're not all colored, but this one's particularly pretty for Port of Boiling Springs, the village. And so this is a map, 1867 map of Carlisle, and I threw it up in that little red, I don't know how you can see it, square that I put up there is for the parcel for the deed that I handed out. So that's the Riley property. So they still owned it. William Riley still owned it in 1867. So his name's on the map. So to carry it through, Riley is on this map of Carlisle in 1867. Then you get the county, Cumberland County is lucky in that they have 2 atlases. A lot of the counties only have 1 atlas. So we have an 1858 atlas and an 1872 atlas. I've pulled both of them. On this, I pulled a bunch of kind of fun things, which people can come up and look at then, once I'm done talking. So this is the 1872 atlas page for Lower Allen Township. But both of the 1858 and 1872 atlas have names on them. So this is great for the people that don't live in boroughs, that you get country folk in the rural areas with names. So if you have a general idea of where the farm is, you can see the name. You have the name from the deeds, the dot for where the farm should be or where the house should be. Bird's eye view. Anything that is kind of artistic, realize that there could be artistic license. It might not be 100% perfect. Could be how someone wanted it to appear. These are some of my favorite things. I didn't pull a Sanborn map. I can pull one. The Sanborn maps are some of my favorite things. These are once again only good for boroughs. So they're fire maps. And these are partially available online. If you search, I normally use the Penn State site, but if I search Penn State Sanborn maps, it'll come up. Yeah, and Library of Congress has an excellent site, so you can look at a couple different places. But where they don't have as many as we have, these were edited later. So they would basically paste changes over, like literally just blue paste. So we have revisions through 1970 and Penn State doesn't have those. So they have kind of through, I think, the 1923 online. So what's great about these, is they tell you a lot about a property because fire insurance. So they tell you what the building's made out of, how many stories, all the things. So you can see how anything changed from the time period. So the earliest Carlisle map is 1885. The last official map is 1929. So after that, the borough doesn't change its limits at all. So only changes within those limits are made. But you can see if there's any changes, and sometimes you can tell exactly within that when a property is built or changed. So Sanborn maps are really, really cool. I really enjoy the Sanborn maps. So very useful tool, and they're also great because so many of them are digitized. There's Mechanicsburg ones, Shippensburg, they're, but only boroughs because they're more worried about fire with buildings being close together and things like that. So there's something that's available for cities and towns. Okay. We have lithographs, once again, artistic license. In this case, things that really don't exist anymore. For Whitehall Soldiers Orphan School, Seidel's Manufacturing, colorized postcards. Some of this doesn't exist anymore, has been lost to fire. Now, I point out this stuff because I like pointing out in photographs, trying things from different angles. Yes, this is a photograph of Orr's Bridge. But what's in the background of the photograph? Houses. So, and those houses I'm sure aren't identified, and they're like, it's not John Smith's house, I'm sure this photograph's only cataloged as Orr's Bridge with, from looking south. So, or you get, parade photo, or, so-and-so's garden. So trying searches from different angles, broader searches, you might get a part of the building. You might get the back end of your building because it's the neighbor's house. So approaching things from different angles, because, if you didn't try searching for Orr's Bridge, you might have never gotten this your house, because it would have never come up if you searched for this house. So, and a lot of times, once again, also searching, going back to the names, most of the times we have photos of homes, but it's so-and-so's family because they're standing in front of their house. So we don't know who's the address because they didn't have an address, but it's the John Smith family, the, McClure family standing in front of their home. So it goes back once again to knowing the names to look for a house photo, but trying different angles, because if you didn't search for Orr's Bridge, you might have missed a photo of your house. Interior shots. Once again, we most likely do not have an interior photo of your house. 99%. Because we don't have a ton of interior photographs of houses. But we might have some from a particular time period that maybe your house is from. Unless your house is from like the 1760s, and then no. But maybe you like a particular time period. So we might have something, and maybe you're interested in furnishings or fixtures, decorative details. So, like I said, they can be difficult to come by, but you might be able to find some interior shots that could be of interest to you from a certain time period. So that might be, be able to direct you. in a certain direction for certain things. So this is West High Street. This is the interior of the Market House, which is no longer standing. We also have some aerial shots. There's also aerial shots available online. There was no parking downtown, very little. Yes. So the direct tax, so this is one of the first main federal tax. And this is why I say so many houses are said to be dated to pre-1798, because houses were described in such detail on this tax, dimensions, number of windows. So it's, I shouldn't say easy. It's never easy. This is also known as the glass tax. So sometimes this will be referred to as the glass tax, or the US direct tax of 1798. So we had to pay for some wars. It was expensive. So this is a way of funding or paying back the war. So they go through and they, measure people's houses basically, and tax on windows, things like that. So we can see what buildings still exist from that time period based on this. So you'll see things that, like, we know it existed in 1798. We might not be able to tell when it was built, but we can say it was built by 1798. So you'll see by 1798, pre-1798 on structures or in documents. Regular tax rates. It's the last one, I swear. Okay. Sorry. That one. No, it's not coming. Different years, one is 1766 and one is 1838. Yeah, it's one page. So tax records are, I'm walking away from the camera again. Tax records are a great way of narrowing down construction. Because they tend to say brick house. Eventually, not necessarily in the earliest years. So what is being taxed evolves over time. So sometimes they're only caring about land, horses, sheep, humans. But eventually they get into mills, distilleries, type of land, obviously, but they also get into, brick house, bank barn, log house. So they start mentioning that in the tax records, and these will look differently at different times, depending on who's the tax person in the township. These will look different in the same year. If you go through one of the ledgers, it'll look different in a different township. I tried to do a later one from the microfilm, and it didn't print well. So, but eventually it'll go to a 2-page spread across for 1 year with more information. So if you see someone's tax increase greatly, you can maybe assume that they did some improvements to their property. Sometimes you can tell, but you can see the people, what they're being taxed at. An example of tax records. Tax records are a great way of learning more about someone's property. They're also available online through 1838. at the county's website. After that, you have to switch to microfilm. And we have the microfilm through 1930. Other places to look, and I'm going to rush through this because I don't want to go too long. Other places, Orphans Court records are a great place to look. And every time I say Orphans Court records, people kind of look at me weird. So Orphans Court is a lot of things. And in Cumberland County, Orphans Court is in with the Register of Wills office. That's not necessarily the case everywhere in Cumberland County. But the orphan in this case is the case itself. It's not a criminal matter. It's not a civil matter. The case is an orphan. And in many cases, like if you get your marriage certificate, that's through Orphans Court. So you go to Orphans Court to get your marriage certificate. But in many cases, it is matters of probate. So that's kind of why in Cumberland County, it gets lumped in with the Register of Wills office. In many cases, it is dealing with estates and land matters. So there's often estate matters that deal with land, especially in the early records. So there's often land matters lumped in Orphans Court. So look in Orphans Court records if someone dies without a will or things like that, and you're curious about land records. There could be something in Orphans Court. And we have those on microfilm here. So land disputes, Orphans Court. It can happen. Things like wills and estate inventories, vendus. Sometimes wills will distribute land to children or their wives. Estate inventories and vendus. If you want a sense of what property they had on their estate, you know, that can give you an idea of those types of things. Building permits, things like that are very rare and hard to come by. Mechanics liens are very interesting and exist historically at the county archives. Because if someone did pay their bill, the mechanics can put a lien on their home. I'm going to do this quickly. Early land records don't exist here. To get the first land ownership doesn't exist at the county level. So, and this is true kind of across the board in the state of Pennsylvania. So the earliest time period, you had to acquire land. It's a 5-step process. You had to get land from the Penns. After the Revolution, you had to get it from the Commonwealth. It's a 5-step process, more or less. And it wasn't until someone finished that process and received the patent. I have an example of a patent here from Thomas and Richard Penn. That they received the patent. It wasn't until the time period that that person with the patent sold it that's recorded at the recorder of deeds level at the county. Before that, it just happened. Someone else could have started the process. Someone else could have finished it. None of that's recorded at the local level. It's taxed at the local level. But whoever's quasi-owning the land, none of that's recorded at the local level. Until someone receives a patent, none of those kind of deeds are recorded at the local level. We have a really marvelous series of books known as the First Families of Cumberland County. I have one of them. There's like 60 that does all the hard work for us, that has gone through the process for all of Cumberland County, Perry County, Franklin County, many of the counties of old Cumberland County through that process. So we just kind of get to go to that book series rather than kind of do all the hard digging and going through the process and looking through the warrants and patents and all of that to try to figure it out. So the earliest land ownership you're not going to find at the county level, it's at the state level. this is all that's kind of currently covered. This might be slightly outdated, but it is an ongoing project. Yes, there's lots of other things, architectural styles. Yes, land measurements. You can find Sears mail order home catalogs online. Because they are here. We do, because anywhere the railroad went, you got Sears homes. So we do have Sears homes. Preservation directories, the state archives, where you can find things that go with the copied survey books that the state did as part of that process, are online. Property mapper. We have our own Cumberland County Register of Historic Places that people can apply and be on. That link is there. There are a few useful sources. These books, just a few, there are so many out there. But I have taken up more of my time than I think I'm supposed to. So I have things people can look at, and I know there's questions. So, yes. Yes. Yes.
So I hope everyone had a lovely break, got a little bit of a snack, and I appreciate all of the connections that are taking place. I am very, very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who not only is going to demonstrate how everything Kara just described looks in practice. And this is wonderful because not only is this a case study, but it's a mystery as well. So you'll be in suspense. Our presenter is Pamela Anderson, who's connected with the Franklin County Historical Society and who's the owner of Anderson Cogen. Pamela is a certified genealogist with the Board of Certified Genealogists, a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, and has done extensive genealogical research, property research, and has about 5 writing projects in the works at this moment. So she's an amazing resource. We're very, very lucky to have her with us tonight. And I think you'll find this case study to be really fascinating. So Pamela, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. So I want to thank Steve Berg, or as some of you know him as Dr. Berg. I know him as Steve because I did construction work on his house before, many years ago. And to the South Mountain Partnership for inviting me to speak tonight. And for a couple of Franklin County friends that came to see me, anybody here familiar with Hook and Flask? Yeah, well, my husband and my good friend Andrea play there on open mic night, and Andrea said, I want to be you. And I said, what? I want to just sit back and enjoy the show. And I said, okay, come to my talk then. So she came. So thanks for coming. How many people here are either living or researching in Cumberland County? I figure most people. Anybody Franklin? Couple. Okay. Adams, anybody Adams? Anybody from another place? Maybe? Everywhere. Okay, good. Well, I'm hoping that this will apply to most of Pennsylvania and beyond. Thanks to Kara for her presentation, because you will notice a lot of the resources that I use to research my project, she already talked about. So you should have it all down right now, know everything you need to know about the records. And I hope to show you how I use these records to research my Franklin County farmhouse. So to give you an idea, the amount of research that I've done, this is the notebook on my house's history. And it's up on the table up here if anybody wants to flip through it. It's really boring. So I think you'll get it from what I'm talking about. And unlike Cumberland County, Franklin County has a folder on every single property that's in the county. I'm lying. It's not true. No, definitely not. Sorry, I do. I know you were hoping that we did. Yeah, I know. So I did my house history because my family is not from Pennsylvania. And I wanted to do genealogy research. They're not from where I live. So I researched the family that lived in my house. And also I was a general contractor for 25 years, so I was really interested in houses. So why house histories? Archives and historical societies, they get requests all the time from people wanting to know when their house was built. They ask what records are available that can tell me when my house was built and where are they and how will they help? And like Kara talked about, the overarching principle is researching the families because the families will lead to the house. My husband and I bought our house in Franklin County in south central Franklin County. You know, Franklin County looks like a triangle, and we're about 10 miles from the Maryland border. And we bought it in 1986. We're the third family and the second longest family to live there. The first thing that we did was interviews. And I'm using a new computer, so bear with me. The realtor that sold our house to us knew a little bit about our house, but we also met the former owners and their relatives, and they told us a little bit more. Roger and Dorothy Cody told us that our house was built in the 1880s and that the kitchen and bathroom were added in the 1970s because they were the ones that added it. Lester Bovey was the last of the original family to own the property. And I don't know for how long, years, our house was known as the old Bovey farm. I think now it's the Anderson place, but it's still, if you tell somebody that's lived there for a long time, the old Bovey farm, they'll go, yeah, yeah, we know where that is. And his niece lives down the road from us. And she told us that the Boveys used to raise chickens in my husband's office. Neighbors and friends told us even more, and some asked to tour our house. And we've had our house on formal house tours to raise money for nonprofits, and people that have come through our house would tell us even more about the house. This is Libby and Lester Bovey about 1950. And Lester gave me this picture of our house with them standing in front of it. And he also gave me this picture. This is Lester on the left. He said he was about 2. And Conrad Pfeiffer, Lester's grandfather and the builder, he said, on the right. So now I can research 2 families, the Boveys and the Pfeiffers. Lester also gave me these 2 photographs of the log cabin. On the right is the log cabin in relation to our current house. So you can see it's a little bit down the hill from the front porch. It's no longer there, but I have this photograph that shows me where it used to be. The Arcadia Images of America books, I'm sure you're all familiar with these. There's probably a few on Carlisle and Cumberland County. They can also have photos. My house was not in this book, but I gave these photographs to the author so that future researchers could find the house. Now we'll talk about deeds. Like Kara said, deeds don't usually mention specific buildings, but they do mention families. So I began with our deed and worked backward. Note 3 things. The grantor or grantee indexes may not be accurate, and they're not all the same. So Kara showed you the ones from Cumberland County. The ones from Franklin County are totally different. Not all deeds were filed, and they may not be filed where the house was built. So take Shippensburg. You know, it's half in Cumberland, half in Franklin. If your house was built in Franklin, but you happen to be in Carlisle, you might have filed your deed in Carlisle. So look at adjoining counties. And if there's no deed, it may mean that the property was passed down as an inheritance. Because why would you record a deed if you're giving it to one of your family members? It really doesn't matter. And as a side note, there is no law in Pennsylvania that says that your deed has to be recorded. It's a good practice to do, but there's no law. So people do that now. This is a simple in and out table of deeds that shows the most important deeds transferring the largest amount of acreage and for my house and any family relationships. Note that there's missing link or links between Jacob Wingert, which is another family I have to research. So there's 3 now, to Wallace and Wolf at the bottom, who I found their names in other records. Jacob Wingert was not found as in the grantee index as purchasing the land. So I had to use other records to find the grantor, the person who sold him the property. This is the spreadsheet that I actually use when I'm working, and it has the most recent of the 27 deeds that I found for my property. I list as much information as I can on this to compare. I put the grantor, the grantee, and their residences because they may not be living in the same county when they purchase the property. The date purchased and the date recorded, because the date recorded is usually what you'll find in the deed books. How much it cost, the location, just in case there were border changes. A description of the acreage and the neighbors to verify that I have the right property and the right owners. And of course, the source. As Kara said, it's important to write down where you got the information, the county, state, the volume, and the page. Tax records, what can they show? They can show an increase in taxes, and that might signal that there was a new building put on the property or an addition. And remember that construction might have been earlier than the tax increase, because you're going to avoid the tax man as long as you can. And so it might not signal exactly when your property or your buildings changed. An owner's disappearance from the tax records might signal a death or a move or sale of the property. Taxpayers can go back and forth like this Wingert family. Jacob owned property and paid taxes in 1830. Henry, his son, purchased property in 1831 and paid taxes. This up here is the 1832 record. Henry is crossed out at the top and Jacob is written in as paying for 82 acres. In 1883, Jacob paid. In 1834, Henry paid. Payment can be by the owner or the renter or the tenant. If the taxes were paid, the county really didn't care who paid them. So I followed the tax records backward from Pfeiffer to Wingert to Wingert. This gets a little complicated here. So, feel free to ask questions while I'm talking too. In 1814, Jacob Wingert owned 75 acres in Antrim Township. In 1813, Jacob wasn't listed in the tax records the year before, which meant he didn't own the property in 1813 when the taxes were collected, and that he purchased the property either in 1813 after taxes were collected or 1814. But I couldn't find Jacob in the deed book as a grantee. So I had to do some detective work. I checked the 1813 Antrim taxes for owners owning between 70 and 80 acres. I found 6 men who met that criteria. Then I went back to the 1814 records to see who didn't own the land anymore. And I found Barnhart Sauer, who owned land from 1809 to 1814. And I always thought if I had to come up with a drink for my house, it would be called the Barnhart Sour. And then I found David Wolf's 1809 tax record. And here he is crossed out because he sold property. On the left, it says, now Barnhart Sour, 75 acres. So the tax records close the missing ownership link. Everybody got that? This is my working spreadsheet, which has over 100 tax records from 1798 to 1911. And this is just a sample. It includes the Pennsylvania Septennial Census, which is really a tax record and not a census. I listed the year, the township, in case the borders changed, taxpayer, their occupation, the amount of acreage and the value, tracking the purchases and sales if there's a difference, and the taxes paid. Again, is there a difference to see if there's more land or more buildings? And then here is the 1798 US direct tax list. This record shows David Wolf owned a one-story, 18-foot by 20-foot log dwelling house with 3 windows. Does this look familiar? 18 by 20, 3 windows, 1 on the front, 2 on the side. Was this the 1798 tax record for my property? I think so. So, because the tax record disclosed the missing ownership link, I went back to try to find the missing deed or deeds. To recap, Jacob Wingert was not found in the grantee index purchasing the property, but Barnhart Sour was found in the grantor index buying the property in 1814. Barnhart Sour 1814 deed also mentions David Wolf. And this is what this says. Being the same tract of land to which a patent was granted by the Commonwealth to David Wolf dated the 18th day of April, 1810, who by deed dated the 19th of October, 1811, conveyed the same to the said Barnhart Sour, together with all the buildings and improvements therein erected. So were there buildings? Was there a house? Or is that just boilerplate language that goes in every deed? Did David Wolf build a house on the property by 1798 and that tax record before he owned it in 1810? So I revised my in and out table showing the property owners. Wingert father to Wingert son to Pfeiffer son-in-law to Pfeiffer Bovey daughter to Bovey son, and we'll get into those other people soon. Census records. They can show when people appear and disappear and can verify the tax records and the deeds. So Wolf, Sour, Wingert, Pfeiffer, and Bovey, all the people that lived in my house, I think, were shown in the tax records. In 1800, I found David Wolf. In 1810, Barnhart Sour or Jacob Wingert. I don't know, because both people lived in Antrim. They were both found in the census records. So who was living on my property? Was Sour the owner and Wingert the tenant? Sour's 1810 neighbors in the census, so those are the people that surround him when you take the census, because the enumerator probably walked to each house that was close, matched his 1811 and 1814 neighbors in the deeds. So I deducted that Sour lived on that property at that time. From 1820 to 1870, it was the Wingert family. 1850 to 1870, the property value in the census was somewhere between $5,600 and $7,200. The 1850 agricultural schedule listed the property valued at $7,000, which is similar to those two or three tax records. From 1880 to 1920, Conrad Pfeiffer was listed as the owner. Pennsylvania also had a triennial farm census. In 1924, Annie Bovey, Conrad's daughter, owned an 85-acre farm with no radio and no electricity. Yeah. 1927, Lester Bovey, Annie's son, was renting the same farm. The conveniences in the house were listed as one telephone, no running water in the kitchen, no furnace heating, radio, or electricity. In 1930, Lester Bovey was listed as a renter, and in 1940 and the 1950 censuses, Lester was listed as the owner. So here's my spreadsheet for those 17 census records: the year, the head of household, the location, the occupation, the amount of acres, the value, other personal property value. Again, look for anything, any drastic changes that might indicate a new building. Probate records. They can help track property too. In 1875, Henry Wingert died without a will. In 1876, Conrad Pfeiffer bought 108 acres from Henry's administrators. There were 4 deeds or releases that confirm this transaction. In 1924, Conrad sold the property to his daughter, Annie Pfeiffer Bovey. And in 1925, Conrad died without a will, but there was no land in the will because he'd already sold it to his daughter. So let's recap. My house was built in the 1880s. The property was in the records since 1798. The Wingert, Pfeiffer, Bovey families were there since 1814. So when was my house built? Still don't know. Was the current brick house the first house? Not likely. So like genealogy, you have to start with what you know. And I know this is my house. Okay, so we're going to go backward in time using maps. One of the first things I do is check Google Maps. I also want to check Google Maps for older photos. If you notice, you can go to Google Maps and it'll tell you what year that photo was taken. You can also search for any older photos. And you want to look at both the satellite view and the street view. This picture is from 2012. So it's not the current one. The current one that's up on Google is from 2019. And that photo shows no fencing around there, because we were in the process of having it replaced. So the next photo that Google takes will show white fencing and solar panels on that side of the barn. Here's an aerial view of the property. And you want to locate the property on the satellite view. And you want to check the roof line for possible additions that might not be apparent from the ground. So the bottom left corner is the original house. You can see the front porch at the first, and then you go back and see the house. In the middle is the kitchen addition that the Codys put on, and the top right is the carport that we added later. This 2018 survey was done because we sold a section across the road in the top left corner of this map. And note the shape, the footprint of the house, same as the satellite view. Here's a 1990 survey that was done for the neighbors. Always research the neighbors. And again, look at my house footprint. You can't see it, I know it's really tiny in there, but it's pretty much the same. These are tax maps from 1967 and 1959. The 67 map shows only the house and doesn't list the acreage. But the 59 map shows the house and buildings, and it shows on there 88 acres. Here's the 1959 hand-drawn tax map compared to a 1956 aerial tax map photograph. And like these maps, our archives in Franklin County have them too. Here's a cadastral atlas or land ownership map, and they can provide information also. These are available online at the Library of Congress through about 1900. Maps are available for the shaded areas. They're best for the mid-1800s rural properties in the Northeast US, which is perfect for my house. And it's great for Pennsylvania. I mean, look at all those counties that have maps, all those shaded areas. I think there's only 2 there, and I don't even know what counties those are that don't have maps. So here are the 2 maps of my property. Ours were a little bit different. Ours were 1858 and 1868. Note H. Winger at the top of this arrow and at the bottom. There's 1 building in the 1858 map at the top and 2 in the 1868 map at the bottom. I'm not sure if it's the barn and our house that are those 2 squares there, but our barn is closer to the road, so I'm thinking that's what it is, unless they decided that in 58, maybe that's a log cabin, and maybe the log cabin was still there in 68 and a house. So I really have to do a little more work. The same neighbors are listed on this map as are listed on the deeds I found. So I've got the right person. Also look for historic landmarks. SH stands for schoolhouse, and it was across the road. It's still there, kind of, but now it's a residence. Kara talked about road records because they can show property changes too. Here's the schoolhouse, and here's Henry Winger. In October 1872, Henry was a petitioner who wrote, "Road is through wet and swampy land and will require a great expenditure of money and labor to make it passable." There are many other signatures on this petition of the neighbors. So again, research the neighbors because you might find your house. The road was surveyed in April 1873 and moved in August. The yellow line and the red line are where it was moved. My road is now offset around the other side of the schoolhouse that you can see there. Here we'll talk about first families of Old Cumberland County. I know Kara went through this really quickly because she was running out of time. So I'm going to show you how I use this series. This is my favorite series. I mean, this is great. I don't even have to explain it to you because she already talked about it. And thank you so much to Cumberland County for doing this. Each area has a book and a map that goes with it. The authors overlaid original maps on current roads, so it's pretty easy to find your property. I circled my original property on the accompanying map. My property was listed as GRN 136. GRN is for Greencastle because I live near Greencastle. And it has the 2 buildings like on the 1868 atlas. Again, maybe my house and barn, maybe the house and another house. You can also start with the index if you know the original landowner and then go to the map to find the original property. And I do that with when I'm researching for someone else that they don't know, they know who owned it, but they don't know where the property is. So I'll go backwards. And then you can go to the description of GRN 136 in the book to confirm the tax records and the deeds. This shows a 1768 warrant to John Wallace. It was surveyed in 1808 for 4 men, including David Wolfe. See how big, I mean, that's a pretty big piece of property. And I call it a boot on its heel. You can see that. Okay, got that picture in your mind, because here's the original rough draft survey for John Wallace, which is on the Franklin County Archives website. Has the same shape, same date, and same neighbors, okay? See the shape? See the shape. You can also go to the Pennsylvania Archives website, which lists John Wallace as the warranty to 4 patentees, including David Wolfe. There are links in the handout that I gave you to the Pennsylvania Archives website. It's not easy if you haven't really used it a lot. So if anybody has wants to do it and has problems with it, get a hold of me or Kara, because we can walk you through that. But that's where First Families of Cumberland County got their maps. So here's the original John Wallace parcel before it was divided. It was 193 acres, dated May 1808. And this is how the property was divided among the 4 patentees. And I was able to figure this out from the records on the Pennsylvania Archives site. The green line on there is my current road. So you can see that our property goes across that road. And this map shows David Wolfe's parcel and description. 74 acres, 95 perches, surveyed to John Wallace, May 1808. And here's page 1 of the warrant application, and this is found on Ancestry. Here's page 2, and here's the property description. 1768, January 15th of Antrim Township, Cumberland County, because Franklin wasn't formed from Cumberland until 1784. So this was in Cumberland. John Wallace requests a location for 200 acres of land in Cumberland County, Antrim Township, bounded by lands of Patrick McLean, Simon Eaker, and James McLean. So let's recap again. The property was in the records since 1768. The same family owned it since 1814. Was there more than one house on the property? Maybe one built from the 1790s to the 1810s. One built in 1850s or 60s, and one built in the 1880s. Newspapers. Oh yeah, reminder alert, research the families, especially in newspapers, because this is the best part. These are property transaction notices, and they can confirm your deeds. In 1986, the Codys sold it to us. In 1971, Lester Bovey sold it to the Codys. And in 1952, Annie Piper Bovey sold it to her son, Lester Bovey. Newspapers can also confirm location. Again, we're going to go backwards in time. 1903, Conrad Piper's farm was 3 miles east of Marion, and that's where my house is. In 1900, George Stauffer moved to the Piper house in Clay Hill. My house is north of Clay Hill. In 1899, William Fortney moved from the Piper farm near Zentmeyer. My house is south of what used to be Zentmeyer. I think there's maybe 5 houses there on our road. In 1819, a linen bag was found by Jacob Winger, and it said, living near Greencastle, Antrim Township, Franklin County. Our house is northeast of Greencastle. So he must have been living in a house built by 1819. Marriage notices can also confirm location. 1925, Lester married Libby Barnhart. The Bovies will take up farming on the farm of his mother near Clay Hill. In 1905, Annie Pfeiffer married Lemuel Bovie, the daughter of Conrad Pfeiffer, well-known citizen of Guilford Township. Newspapers are not always right. We live in Antrim Township, but Guilford borders Antrim, so it's close. FYI, I found this just recently that Annie and Lemuel got married in March, and Lester was born in May. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, some things never change. And Lemuel left, and I have not been able to find out what happened to him, so I do not know. And that's one of the reasons that Conrad sold the property to his daughter, because you don't usually hear of daughters getting the property. Obituaries can also confirm family and location. In 1997, Lester Bovie was listed as an 8th generation farmer in Clay Hill. In 1910, Susanna Pfeiffer, wife of Conrad, died in her home near Clay Hill in her 63rd year. And here's a really good part. Mrs. Pfeiffer, whose maiden name was Wingert, was born in the house which occupied the site of the house in which she died. She was born in the house which occupied the site of the house in which she died. So what conclusions can I make from this obituary? Susanna Pfeiffer was born in 1848, and I got that from my genealogy research. So there was some house there in 1848. She died in a different house in 1910. So there were at least 2 houses on my property. Was it a log cabin and my brick house? Or was there a 3rd house? Auction or sale notices can describe property. Oh, by the way, if you're a member of the Franklin County Historical Society, you have free access to newspapers.com for Franklin County, because we made a deal with newspapers.com and digitized all our newspapers. We scanned them for 2 years, and now we have access to them, and you can search them there. And if you're not a member, you can pay a couple bucks and still come in and use the computer. Okay, auction or sale notices. This, the first one is 1971. This is a public sale notice, and it only lists household goods. However, it does give directions to the property, which is 3 miles east of Marion and 5 miles northeast of Greencastle. The 1875 real estate at public sale notice lists the following: a 115-acre farm, part in Antrim, part in Quincy. Again, we're on the border. Improvements consist of an excellent weatherboarded dwelling house and log house. Weatherboarded. I have some more information. In 1875, there was no brick house on my property. There were 3 houses on the property at different times: a log house, a weatherboarded or frame house, and our brick house, built after the 1875 public sale. So, finally, look for similar houses in the same area as yours. If you live in town, there's likely to be many houses that look similar to yours. I don't live in town. So when we would drive into Greencastle, I always noticed this one house that looked so familiar. My house is on the left, and this house on the right is about 6 miles from my house. So I researched this house, and then I contacted the owner. Merritt Hammond's house and my house have identical features: our stone foundation and footprint. The front porches are the same. The slate roofs and the structure and the chimneys and the front doors and the windows and the interior stairs and trim and details. This, what I'm presenting today, is half of a lecture that I do. The other half is on architectural details and how to research your house using architectural details, because I was a builder. So Merritt and I compared our houses. I went to his, he came to mine. And we wanted to look for original details that may not be there anymore. My outside trim is covered in aluminum. Cody's put aluminum over it. But Merritt's is still original, so I can guess pretty much what's under my aluminum at my house without tearing off the aluminum, even though I really would like to do that, but my husband said no. So anyway, we both had double front doors, and they're each about this big. They're not very big at all. And he replaced his double front doors with one door and a side light because he could not find anybody to fix his original front doors. He removed his shutters and never reinstalled them. We found our shutters in an outbuilding and put them back on. And Sanborn maps that Kara talked about. Because Merritt lives in a more urban area, if you want to call Greencastle that, I found his house on a Sanborn fire insurance map, but not until 1915 when the borough expanded. Greencastle has earlier maps, but Merritt's house was not there. Here is his property on North Allison Street in Greencastle. Everything on a Sanborn map means something. Pink means brick, yellow means a frame building, a dotted line means a frame porch. A capital D stands for dwelling, a private residence, not more than 2 families. And a number 1 or 2, and sometimes 3 will tell you the number of stories. And the keys to Sanborn maps are available all over the internet, so you can find that pretty easily. And this map shows that our houses were virtually identical, probably built by the same builder about the same time. But Merritt didn't know when his house was built. But you guys are probably wondering why I'm walking around with a piece of wood here, right? I want to pass this around if you want to take a look at it. Because this was the ultimate find. Contractors found this piece of trim when refurbishing an exterior door to fit an existing space in my house. We flipped it over and found writing on the back. It says, C.F. Pfeiffer built this house 1889. Yay. And although it says that he built this house, it's likely that he had a lot of help from a real builder because after all, he was a full-time farmer. So let's recap one more time. I found the property in the records back to 1768. The original family lived there for over 150 years, and there were 3 houses on the property: a log house, a wood frame house, and our current brick house built in 1889. Questions? Kara, do you want to come up in case anybody has any questions for you too? Because you didn't get much time for questions at the end.
Do you know where to put the house still on your property?
I think it was on the same foundation as our current brick house. Mhm. Any other questions? Yes.
Your interior trim chestnut?
Tom, do you remember what they said?
What's it about?
Is the interior trim chestnut on our house? I don't know, but Merritt's is the same type, but it may be. It may be. Yes.
out front.
Yes, there was a handout out front, yes. Yes,
Curious to know if either of you have come across the use of dendrochronology and how accurate it is.
what did you say?
Dendrochronology.
Dendro,
Making the woods, testing the wood.
Oh.
They've done it at Mount Tabor.
do you want to come up to the microphone so they can
I
hear?
think it's pretty accurate, depending. I have not done it myself, but I believe they did it at Mount Tabor. The church in Mount Holly Springs, some archaeology students did it at Mount Tabor. I have not personally done it, but it has happened. But I can't speak to it myself, but it definitely, they have used it, and I think it is pretty accurate. And I think in the case of Mount Tabor, they realized wow, words. The lumber is older than the church itself, so it was probably used in a pre-existing structure and then repurposed into the church at Mount Tabor. That the logs, and based on how the logs were hewn as well, that was definitely older than the church itself. So
I can tell you one thing about our trim. Downstairs where the formal areas where most people can see, it was stained. And also it was painted grain in our entryway and up our stairway, because then they could use all different types of wood and they could paint it to look like it was stained. Upstairs, everything has been painted. Okay, thank you.
So now is your special opportunity to show off all that you know. With your agenda, there is a QR code on the back, which is our post-test survey. So if you've got your agenda, there's a QR code on the front, and if you flip it over, there's a if you need a paper copy of the post-test, I'd be happy to bring you one. Just let me know, raise your hand, and I can get you one. There's just 5 questions, but if you can answer those, we'd love to see what you were able to learn tonight. That was really good. Weren't they a good team? Weren't they a good team?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I know that you're working very diligently. I just wanted to make 2 quick announcements before you finish up for the night. The first announcement was was our 3rd workshop. We have one more workshop, which we have saved the very best for last, which is going to be on October 29th. It's going to be at the beautiful Kings Gap Resort, not resort, Kings Gap, which is beautiful up on top of the mountain. And that's going to be focusing on resources, both state and county resources for helping to preserve historic resources. The other thing that I want to say is I just wanted to, one more time, thank our presenters, Pamela Anderson and Kara. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Cumberland County Historical Society for graciously hosting us tonight. Organizers, is there any other announcements for the evening? Okay, so if you would, if each of you could please fill a cup of coffee before you leave, or grab some food so we don't have to bring it home. Thank you so much for a great night, and hopefully we'll see you next month.